Ladies and gentlemen, you see, there's an odd habit many of us have. Whenever we feel misunderstood, misjudged, or unseen, we rush to explain ourselves, to justify who we are, why we are, and what we feel, as though our existence needed permission from others to be real, as if the depth of our soul could be captured in someone else's fleeting understanding. But here's the twist. No matter how much you explain, you can never make another fully see you, not because they refuse to see, but because their eyes are shaped by their own experience, their own wounds, their own dreams. So even your clearest words pass through filters that are not your own. And that's not wrong, it's simply the nature of perception. Now, why is it that we crave to be understood? Because we believe that understanding is the bridge to love, that if they could only know what's inside, they would stop judging, stop walking away, stop hurting us. But love that depends on explanation is not love. It is a negotiation. Real healing does not begin when others accept your version of the story. It begins when you no longer need to tell the story at all. Silence is not the absence of thought. It's the space where truth rests undisturbed. When you retreat into your own presence, when you sit with the ache without naming it, without trying to fix it or share it, something miraculous happens. The ache softens, the wound breathes, and you begin to understand that you are not broken, you are becoming. The more you explain, the more you tie yourself to the reactions of others. Jeku Hyahu. You become a puppet of their understanding, yanked around by the strings of their approval. But in silence, you reclaim your stillness. You realize, I don't owe anyone my peace in exchange for their opinion. You begin to live as you are, not as you are perceived. Have you noticed how nature never explains itself? The ocean doesn't justify its storms. The moon doesn't apologize for its phases. The tree doesn't need to explain why its leaves fall. Everything in nature simply is. And because of that, it moves with grace. You too are part of nature, not a mechanical thing, not a role to be played, but a living mystery. And mysteries are not explained, they are lived. Healing in silence doesn't mean repression. It means you've stopped outsourcing your healing to the reactions of others. It means you've stopped seeking applause for your growth. It means you've turned inward, where the real transformation always begins. When you stop explaining, you start listening, not to others, but to yourself. You begin to hear what the noise of justification had buried for so long, your inner voice, soft and steady, saying, you are already enough. Let the silence hold you. Let the unspoken speak for you. Let your stillness become the loudest declaration of your worth. Because when you no longer need to be understood, you finally begin to understand yourself. And that is the beginning of true healing. We live in a world where people are constantly trying to explain themselves, their feelings, their past, their reasons, their worth. It becomes a habit, a survival mechanism. Somewhere deep within, there's a voice that says, if they could only understand me, they would love me. If they knew why I am the way I am, they wouldn't walk away. They wouldn't walk away. They wouldn't judge. And so we go on, telling our stories, giving reasons, trying to shape how others perceive us. But this is a subtle trap. The more you explain yourself, the more you begin to believe that you need to. You become dependent on being understood as a condition for peace. This need to explain is often rooted in fear, fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of not being good enough as you are. And so the mind, in its constant motion, keeps constructing a case as if you were on trial in front of the world. You craft your words carefully, share your experiences in a way that might earn empathy, hoping to be seen, hoping that someone might say, ah, now I get it. But even if they do, it's never quite enough, is it? Because that feeling of being understood fades quickly. The moment passes, and you're back again, trying to explain the next thing. It becomes a loop that doesn't end. What we don't realize is that every time we explain ourselves in search of validation, we are, in a subtle way, giving away our power. We are placing the value of our being in someone else's hands, someone who might not even have the capacity to hold it. We act as if our truth needs to be dressed up in the right words to be accepted, as if our inner experience must be translated into a language others will find agreeable before it's allowed to be real. But the truth of your life doesn't need a witness. It doesn't need an audience. It simply is. The more you try to make others understand you, the more you distance yourself from your own self-understanding, because in the noise of trying to be heard and accepted, you stop listening inwardly. You stop hearing that quiet, calm voice within that has no interest in justifying itself, only in being. That voice doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It simply exists, grounded in presence. And this presence, this silence, is where your healing begins. When you stop explaining yourself, something amazing happens. The nervous system calms down, the inner fight dissolves, you begin to return to yourself without needing to edit, filter, or manage your reality for others. You start to feel whole, not because someone told you that you are, but because you finally stopped looking outward for confirmation. You stop seeing yourself as a concept to be sold, and begin experiencing yourself as a presence to be lived. Healing requires space, and space cannot exist when you're constantly busy forming words and arguments to defend your existence. Silence gives birth to that space. It allows the inner turbulence to settle. In that stillness, something very real comes to the surface, your original self, unburdened by the opinions of others. You start to realize that you were never meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be yourself, fully and honestly, and whoever is meant to align with that will do so without you needing to perform or persuade. So many of us exhaust ourselves trying to be palatable, acceptable, understandable. But the truth is, we are not here to be perfectly explained. We are here to be real, to be alive, to be evolving. Some people will never get you, and that's okay. Their understanding is not your responsibility. Your healing doesn't depend on their approval. It depends on your willingness to sit with yourself in your rawest, most authentic state, without the performance. The act of no longer explaining is not about shutting people out. It's about choosing peace over performance. It's about letting your life be your truth, not your words. When you do that, you don't need to announce your growth. You don't need to prove your transformation. You simply embody it. You walk in silence, but that silence speaks louder than any explanation ever could. There's something deeply liberating about realizing that no one outside of you needs to understand your experience in order for it to be valid. From a young age, we are trained to give reasons, to defend our choices, to shape our feelings into something that others can digest. This constant external orientation fragments us. We begin to live in anticipation of others' reactions. We share our pain, not for healing, but for acceptance. We speak not because it brings clarity, but because silence makes others uncomfortable, and we have learned to fear that discomfort. But healing is not a performance. It is not loud. It doesn't arrive with explanation, justification, or applause. It comes in quiet, often unnoticed, often misunderstood. Real healing begins the moment you stop negotiating your pain with the outside world. Because as long as you are trying to make someone else understand, you are postponing your own understanding. You are placing the resolution of your wounds in the hands of those who may have no idea what it feels like to live in your skin. That is not healing. That is dependency disguised as connection. There is profound power in choosing silence. Not the kind of silence that hides things, but the kind that holds things. The kind of silence that says, "This is mine." It does not need to be approved or translated. It just needs to be witnessed by me. That kind of silence is sacred. It allows you to stop pouring your energy into being understood and begin directing that energy inward. You begin tending to your wounds with gentleness, instead of waiting for someone else to see them before you start caring. The truth is, not everyone is meant to see you. Not everyone is equipped to hold your depth. And that is not a reflection of your worth. It is simply a truth of human nature. The moment you stop demanding understanding from the outside world, you begin to cultivate a relationship with the only understanding that truly matters, your own. You learn to sit with yourself in silence and discover that nothing needs to be said for something to be real. You can feel your pain fully without narrating it. You can move through your growth without performing it. You can become whole without proving it. It is in this kind of inner silence that you meet the truth of yourself, the version of you that is untouched by others' projections, the self that simply is, not defined by your past, not shaped by others' opinions, not held hostage by the need to be validated. In that space, you begin to feel something you've likely been seeking your whole life: peace. Not the peace that comes from everyone liking you, but the peace that comes from no longer needing them too. Healing in silence also teaches you discernment. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin to see clearly who is drawn to your essence versus those drawn to your performance. You learn who is willing to meet you as you are without expecting you to mold yourself into something more comfortable, and that clarity is a gift. It allows you to build your life on truth rather than illusion, connection rather than approval. This silence, this inward stillness, doesn't disconnect you from the world, it reconnects you to it, but in a new way. You no longer show up seeking validation. You show up from a place of wholeness, with nothing to prove. You begin to speak only when it adds to your peace, not when it's a plea for someone else's understanding. And in that space, everything changes. You are no longer defined by what you can explain. You are defined by what you are willing to live, quietly and fully. And so healing begins not when you are finally understood, but when you finally stop needing to be, when your silence becomes not a void, but a sanctuary, when you stop offering pieces of yourself for others to dissect and start gathering those pieces into something sacred, something whole, something truly yours. Explaining yourself constantly is a subtle form of self-abandonment. It may not look that way on the surface. After all, what's wrong with helping people understand you? But underneath that urge to explain is often a hidden belief that who you are, as you are, is not enough unless someone else agrees, approves, or validates it. This need to be understood becomes a quiet addiction. You begin filtering your truth through the reactions of others, softening your edges, polishing your emotions, packaging your past in a way that might make sense to someone who hasn't lived a moment of your experience. And in doing so, piece by piece, you drift away from your authentic self. The need to explain becomes exhausting because it is endless. There's always a new situation, a new misunderstanding, a new person who doesn't quite get you. And each time you try to make yourself seen through words, you lose a little of the sacredness of your own inner knowing. There are truths that don't translate. There are experiences that can only be felt. There are parts of you that were never meant to be dissected by others. They were meant to be held by you in silence, because it is in that silence that you truly meet yourself. You begin to understand that healing doesn't come from someone else finally saying, "Now I understand you." Healing begins when you can say to yourself, "Even if no one ever does, I am still whole." That is the turning point, when you realize that being misunderstood is not a threat, it's simply a fact of life. Not everyone is supposed to understand your journey. Not everyone can. Their inability to see your truth clearly does not make that truth any less real. It simply means you've outgrown the need for external permission to exist as you are. In silence, something powerful begins to unfold. You stop explaining and start observing. You notice your own thoughts without dressing them up. You feel your own emotions without packaging them for someone else's consumption. You become real. Not the version of you you've rehearsed and edited, but the raw, unfiltered being underneath. This self doesn't need applause. It doesn't need permission, acknowledgement. It doesn't even need to be explained. It simply needs space to breathe. And from this silence, a new kind of strength is born, the kind that doesn't shout or defend itself. It's not the strength of force, but of presence. It's the quiet power of someone who knows who they are without needing anyone else to confirm it. When you carry that kind of strength, you walk differently. You stop entering rooms trying to prove anything. You start moving through life with a groundedness that comes from within. People may not understand you, but they will feel you. They will feel the quiet confidence, the still center, the peace that radiates from someone who no longer performs. This is the essence of healing in silence. It is not a withdrawal from life, but a return to yourself. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming whole. You are no longer trying to shape yourself to be digestible to others. You're no longer asking, do they get me? Instead, you're asking, am I staying true to myself? And that shift is everything, because when you stop chasing understanding from the outside, you finally have the space to understand what's going on inside. And what you find there is often not brokenness, but buried wisdom. Not shame, but forgotten beauty. Not a need to be fixed, but a need to be accepted first and foremost by yourself. In silence, that acceptance grows. It roots itself deep, and in time it blossoms into a quiet love for the person you've always been. Before the world taught you that you had to explain her, the process of healing in silence reveals what all the explaining in the world never could, that the deepest kind of peace doesn't require an audience. When you're constantly explaining yourself, your energy becomes scattered. Your mind spins through imagined conversations, rehearsed defenses, and responses to judgments that haven't even been spoken. You become caught in an invisible performance, one that quietly tells your nervous system, you are only safe when others approve. But this is a false safety. It is conditional, fragile, and easily disturbed by the next misunderstanding or misinterpretation. It leaves you constantly on edge, always preparing for the next moment when you might need to prove your worth again. But silence, real, intentional silence, does something different. It removes the stage. It lets the curtain fall. There is no performance in silence, no need to position yourself, no strategy to earn love. In that quiet space, you begin to recognize the tension you've been carrying in your body just to be understood. You notice how exhausting it is to anticipate other people's thoughts about you. And you realize how rarely you've just been with yourself without needing to edit, explain, or fix anything. This is where healing begins, not with explanation, but with rest. Rest from needing to be seen in a certain way. Rest from narrating your life to make it more acceptable to others. Rest from shaping your emotions so they don't make others uncomfortable. When you stop talking and begin listening to your inner world, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. You start to feel what's real underneath the noise, the fears you've ignored, the grief you've suppressed, the joy you've postponed. These inner experiences don't require anyone else's understanding to be valid. They simply need to be felt. It is in this feeling, this raw and unspoken presence, that true healing unfolds. You no longer wait for someone to say, "I see you," before allowing yourself to be seen. You see yourself fully, with compassion. And in doing so, you stop outsourcing your self-worth. You no longer ask others to hold what you've been unwilling to hold within yourself. You become your own witness, your own container, your own source of safety. This is not to say you shut down emotionally or isolate yourself. Quite the opposite. Silence is not suppression, it is deep integration. It's a sacred pause where the soul catches up with the mind. In silence, the need to explain transforms into the capacity to understand. And understanding, in its purest form, is wordless. It doesn't rush to conclusions. It doesn't demand clarity. It sits with mystery. It honors complexity. It allows contradiction. And it recognizes that healing is not a straight path or a linear story. It's a spiral, a return, a deepening. When you stop explaining yourself, people may misunderstand you. Some may walk away. Others may fill in the silence with their own assumptions. But none of that is your burden. What others think about your silence is a reflection of their relationship with their own discomfort, not a reflection of your truth. In time, the right people will begin to feel something different in your presence. A quiet confidence, a peaceful clarity, not because you told them who you are, but because you embodied it. An embodiment doesn't need explanation. It radiates from the way you carry yourself, the way you listen without rushing to respond, the way you honor your boundaries without guilt. It lives in your silence, in the unspoken yes to yourself that no one else has to hear. And when you live from that place, from that stillness, you no longer crave validation. You become your own anchor. That is the kind of healing that cannot be undone, not because you made someone else understand you, but because you finally stopped needing them to. You found peace, not by shouting your truth into the void, but by quietly returning to it again and again until it became the ground you walk on. When you constantly seek to explain yourself, you unconsciously give others authority over your inner world. You hand over the pen and allow them to edit the story of who you are. You wait for their nod of approval before you allow yourself to feel complete, before you let yourself rest. But the more you try to be understood, the more you become misunderstood. Not because people don't care, but because the truth you're trying to express cannot be captured in words alone. Some things, especially the most sacred parts of your journey, can only be known in silence. They are not meant to be spoken, they are meant to be lived, felt, and honored from within. You see, when you explain yourself, you are often trying to shrink a vast, rich, inner experience into something small enough to be consumed by someone else's mind. You simplify your complexity, sanitize your struggles, smooth over the rough edges of your truth, just to make it more palatable, but in doing so, you lose the essence of what's real. The soul doesn't speak in bullet points or convincing arguments. It speaks in presence. It speaks in how you sit with your pain without flinching, how you hold space for your joy without apology, how you remain rooted even when the world misunderstands you. Silence is the language of the soul, and when you stop explaining, you begin to hear its voice again. You begin to return to yourself in the most intimate way. The stillness becomes a mirror, reflecting back the parts of you that don't need to be fixed, only felt. It's in this quiet, wordless space that you realize something profound. You were never meant to be a concept explained. You were meant to be a presence experienced. The most honest moments in life don't come from dialogue, they come from stillness. Think of the times you've sat in someone's presence and just felt the truth between you. No need for clarification, no need for defense, just being. That same kind of presence is possible with yourself. When you let go of the need to explain, you begin to hold space for yourself the way you've always wanted others to. You become your own home, not a place you need to defend, but a place you finally feel safe in. This doesn't mean you isolate yourself or reject connection. In fact, silence deepens your relationships. Because instead of connecting from a place of insecurity or performance, you begin to relate from authenticity. You no longer speak to earn love, you speak to express it. You no longer share your pain to convince someone it's real. You share because you've already accepted it yourself. And that changes everything. It shifts your presence from seeking to offering, from grasping to grounding. People may ask you why you've grown quieter. They may wonder why you don't feel the need to explain every little thing anymore. But you'll know that something inside of you has settled, that the storm has moved on, that you've found a peace too vast for words and too sacred to be broken by anyone's misunderstanding. You'll know that your silence is not empty, it's full of truth, full of clarity, full of love for yourself. You begin to walk through life differently, with less urgency, with more awareness. You listen more than you speak, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know that not everything needs to be said. You conserve your energy. You become selective with your words, your time, your presence. You protect your peace the way you once protected your reputation, fiercely but quietly. And in doing so, you discover a new kind of power, not loud, not aggressive, but deep, steady, unshakable. That power comes from no longer needing to be understood. It comes from trusting that the truth of who you are exists whether others see it or not, and that truth, once claimed in silence, becomes the foundation of your healing. A healing not built on someone else's recognition, but on your own unwavering presence. A healing that says, I am whole even when no one else knows the story. There comes a moment in your journey when you realize that the very effort to explain yourself has become the source of your unrest. Every time you try to make someone understand your choices, your pain, your growth, you are, in some subtle way, stepping out of alignment with yourself. Because deep down, you're not explaining for clarity, you're explaining to gain acceptance. And when that becomes your motive, you are no longer speaking from your center, you are speaking from your wound. And the more you speak from that place, the more disconnected you feel from the peace you've been chasing all along. But here's the beautiful paradox. Peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from no longer needing to be. The mind wants to be known, to be seen, to be confirmed, but the soul just wants to be. And it is in silence, not explanation, where the soul finds its way back to wholeness. Because silence doesn't ask for anything. It doesn't perform. It doesn't seek validation. It simply allows. And in that allowing, healing begins to rise naturally, effortlessly, like sunlight entering a still room. When you enter silence with intention, you begin to observe how often your words were not truly expressions but defenses. You spoke to correct someone's perception of you. You shared to gain control over how you were seen. You explained your emotions, your actions, your very essence, hoping someone would finally say, yes, now I understand you. But even when they did, it was never enough. Because no one else can fully hold the depth of your truth. That's your sacred work. That's your private temple. Healing in silence is about reclaiming that sacred space. It's about drawing your energy inward, not as a form of withdrawal, but as an act of remembering. Remembering who you are without the need to be interpreted. Remembering how it feels to sit with yourself and feel whole without anyone else having to see it. In silence, you realize that being misunderstood is no longer a threat. It is simply part of the human condition. And you stop fighting it. You stop rushing to correct the narrative. You let people carry their version of you. And you stay rooted in the truth only you can feel. This kind of inner strength doesn't look dramatic. It's not loud or forceful. It's soft, steady, and unshakable. It's the calm in your chest when someone misjudges you and you don't feel the urge to defend. It's the grounded stillness that says, let them think what they want. I know who I am. And that knowing, the quiet, wordless kind, becomes your anchor. It holds you steady when the world is full of noise. It gives you clarity when others are lost in projection. You begin to walk through life with a different rhythm, not reactive but responsive, not rushed but intentional. You choose your words carefully because you know not everything deserves a response. You guard your energy, not because you're closed off, but because you finally realized how sacred it is. You become aware that every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you leak energy, and your peace is far too precious to be leaked. In that space of silence, self-trust begins to deepen. You stop asking others, do you understand me? And start asking yourself, am I staying true to me? And the more you live in alignment with that truth, the less you need to explain. Your life, your energy, your presence, they begin to speak for you. And those who are meant to connect with you will feel it, without you needing to convince them of anything. This is what it means to heal in silence, not by hiding, but by holding yourself with such deep honesty and love that your very presence becomes a sanctuary. You no longer perform your pain. You no longer advertise your growth. You simply live it, fully, quietly, powerfully. And that is where true healing not only begins, but endures.